Simone Caldwell, a fearless black police chief in disguise, walks straight into the heart of a racist system she was hired to reform. When she witnesses a young black girl brutalized for being in the wrong neighborhood, Simone intervenes. But instead of justice, she's mistaken for a civilian, assaulted and jailed by her own officers, men who don't know she's their new boss. Her silence becomes her weapon. As secrets unravel, power structures crack, and a quiet war explodes into public view. Can Simone survive long enough to dismantle the very empire that tried to erase her? Where are you watching from? Comment below, and stay till the end to witness justice served to the corrupt racist cops. This ain't your neighborhood, sweetheart. You people don't just stroll into gated communities like it's a park. The words slice through the thick afternoon heat like a blade. Officer Tate's voice dripped with contempt as he loomed over a trembling 12-year-old black girl sitting on the curb, her wrists pinched behind her back by plastic cuffs. She wore a pastel backpack and pink sneakers, one lace untied and dragging in the dirt like a forgotten thought. Her name was Jada, and 5 minutes ago she had only been lost. From the driver's seat of her car, Simone Caldwell sat frozen, her hand tightening around her phone. She hadn't planned to stop. She hadn't planned for any of this. But when she saw flashing lights in a place where nothing ever flashed unless it was a luxury vehicle's turn signal, her instincts told her to pull over. She parked far enough not to interfere, but close enough to see and to record. She rolled down her window. "What did I tell you?" Officer Sweeney barked, circling the girl like a predator sizing up prey. "No ID, no address, just wandering. That's called loitering. Trespassing, if I'm being generous." Jada's voice cracked. "I was looking for my cousin's house. I got turned around." "You got turned around, huh?" Tate interrupted, leaning in with a sneer. "Where are you headed? Crack house? Car to steal? Want me to call your parole officer, little Miss Thug?" "She's a child," Simone murmured to herself, almost involuntarily. Then she hit a record. A second later, Officer Tate's eyes met hers through the windshield. He stepped toward her with a confidence that didn't come from law. It came from centuries of impunity. "Ma'am," he said, drawing out the word like it was sour in his mouth, "I suggest you put that phone away, unless you want to spend your afternoon explaining to me why you're interfering with a lawful investigation." "I'm sitting in my car," Simone replied coolly, holding her ground. "Not interfering, just watching." "Then stop watching," Tate said, his tone dropping to something quieter and far more dangerous, "because next time, people like you might not get the benefit of doubt." There it was, the venom under the badge, the threat disguised as protocol. Simone's jaw tensed, but her face stayed neutral. She had heard those words before, aimed at her father, her brothers, at countless young men she'd fought to protect in courtrooms before stepping into law enforcement. But hearing them now, pointed directly at her, triggered something deeper, something final. She rolled her window up. The phone kept recording. Jada's face, barely holding back sobs, flashed again in her rearview mirror. Small, alone, criminalized in seconds for walking on the wrong block in the wrong body. And Simone knew this wasn't about lost directions. This was about control, image, race, the unspoken boundary lines of America that still pulsed under the pavement, invisible but enforced. She could have stepped out then, revealed who she was, flashed the badge, end it all. But that would have only freed Jada, not the next girl, or the system that built men like Tate and Sweeney. So instead, she waited. She watched until they loaded Jada into the back of a squad car, slamming the door shut as if locking up a felony. No Miranda rights, no calls made, no report taken, just a suspicious minor being transported for questioning. And then the street was quiet again. Just another sunny afternoon in North Westridge, where white fences didn't just keep people out, they kept stories buried. Simone ended the video, saved it to 3 locations. Then she started the engine. As she pulled away, her reflection stared back at her in the rearview mirror, still in civilian clothes, still silent, still a secret, but not for long. Because if the system thought it could operate like this with her watching, it had no idea what was coming. She turned onto Westgate Drive, heading south. But within seconds, a black and white cruiser slid behind her from the side street. No sirens, no lights, just a slow, deliberate tail. Her eyes narrowed. So that's how it's going to be. They still didn't know who she was. Not yet. But they would. And soon, very soon, they'd wish they had treated the woman in the sedan with a little more care. When Simone pulled away, a second patrol car followed close behind. She'd barely made it 2 exits down Highway 18 before the lights flared in her rearview mirror. Red, blue, pulsing like a warning shot. Simone Caldwell let out a slow breath, keeping her hands at 10 and 2 as she signaled and eased onto the shoulder. No sirens, just the lights, just the unspoken message. We see you. The patrol car behind her didn't rush. It coasted up like a lion approaching a gazelle, not out of necessity, but because it could. Simone's eyes flicked to her side mirror. The driver's door opened. Out stepped Officer Quinn Walsh, tall, broad, buzz-cut, tight, and fading into sunburnt skin. His mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but Simone had seen the smirk he wore even before he reached her window. A second door opened. Officer Darla Monroe emerged from the passenger side, shorter, lean, with a resting sneer and a hand already resting near her holster. Simone lowered her window slowly. Calm, composed. License and registration, Walsh said, before she could utter a word. Not a greeting, not an explanation. May I ask what this is about? Simone's voice was even, her face unreadable. Expired tags, Monroe cut in, tapping the rear of Simone's sedan with a gloved hand. Simone almost smiled. Her registration had been renewed last month. Online, verified, documented, stored in both paper and digital format. But this wasn't about tags. It was about her face, her skin, her silence. Still, she complied, slowly reaching for her glove compartment and producing the documents. Walsh snatched them from her hand like she was passing counterfeit bills. He studied them, then her, with feigned confusion. Name doesn't match the type of folks we usually see in this car, he muttered. Where are you headed? Home, Simone answered plainly. Which part of home? Monroe leaned in now, sniffing the air like Simone might reek of something illegal. South side? Or are you just passing through the nice parts again? Simone didn't answer. She didn't flinch. Walsh leaned down. You look real familiar, he said slowly, deliberately. Tribal tattoos? Quiet attitude? Yep. You remind me of some of the people I used to process at Westridge County Jail. You've got that look, like someone who's been in the system. He chuckled to himself. Step out of the vehicle, Monroe ordered. No probable cause, Simone replied. Step out now. Walsh's knuckles tightened on the handle. He wasn't waiting for consent. He was waiting for resistance. Simone knew what came next, and she didn't give them the satisfaction. She opened the door and stepped out. It was 92 degrees. The sun beat down on the asphalt like punishment. Traffic hummed a few lanes over, but no one stopped. No one ever did. Walsh spun her around, yanked her arms back, and clamped the cuffs on so tight her wrists burned. Monroe began patting her down with the practiced aggression of someone who wasn't searching for weapons. Just excuses. Got anything you wanted to declare? Monroe sneered. Drugs? Contraband? Any reason why you're real quiet and real smug right now? Simone said nothing. She didn't grimace, didn't blink. She didn't need to. Because the moment her hands were forced behind her back and the cuffs clicked into place, she was no longer just a civilian. She was a witness, a silent prosecutor, gathering evidence with every unlawful gesture. They searched her car next, tossed open the doors, dug through her glove compartment, under her seats, through her trunk like it was some kind of ritual. Nothing found, nothing planted, yet. Walsh stepped back, squinting. Well, damn, he said with mock disappointment. I was sure we had ourselves a case. She's too clean, Monroe added with a sigh. One of those types. Hides the dirt real well. You know the type. Walsh smirked at Simone. Uppity. Got something to prove? Thinks she's better than the uniform, better than the law. He turned to Monroe. Let's take her in. See what shakes loose. Simone didn't resist when they guided her to the back of the squad car. Still cuffed, still silent. The back seat smelled like sweat and vomit. The doors locked without a sound. She looked out the window as the highway receded behind her. Westridge wasn't 5 miles away. It might as well have been a world apart, because while she had been trained in tactics, law, and de-escalation, while she had worn the badge herself and been entrusted with leading the entire force, they didn't see that. They saw a black woman alone, confidence, unapologetic, and in their world, that was enough to cage her. As the cruiser turned off the exit and the red brick station loomed ahead, Simone let the steel sink into her skin. She could end this now. She could speak 2 words and watch their faces twist in horror. But that would be justice for one day, one name. She wanted justice for all the names they'd erased. So she stayed quiet, because Simone Caldwell was more than just the new police chief. She was the reckoning they didn't see coming. They brought her to the station, and that's where the real nightmare began. The cold slap of fluorescent light followed Simone as Officer Monroe shoved open the steel door of the Westridge holding area. The scent hit her first. Bleach, trying to hide something older, something human. Sweat, despair, blood. Monroe dragged her by the elbow like she was cargo, not a citizen, not a person, and certainly not someone who outranked her by at least 4 pay grades. Name? The officer behind the intake desk didn't even glance up. His fingers clattered across the keyboard like this was just another form, another black body dragged in from the street. Simone said nothing. She stood, wrists still cuffed, a thin cut bleeding just below her left temple where the handcuff had bitten too hard. Her blazer was torn at the sleeve. Her ID was gone, never returned after Officer Walsh had yanked it from her glove box like it was contraband. Officer Monroe stood beside her, chewing gum, with the cocky rhythm of someone who believed their badge made them untouchable. She's not talking, Monroe smirked, probably because she doesn't want her EBT cut off. The intake officer snorted, typed faster, put her down as Jane Doe. No ID, no job, let booking sort it out. Simone didn't flinch. She let their assumptions do the work. She watched the screen over the man's shoulder. Name, Jane Doe. Age, estimated 35. Occupation, N.A. Charges, obstruction, suspicious behavior. Notes, possible instability. Monitor closely. Every line another erasure. Every word was a weapon. They were building a file designed to strip her of credibility, of identity, of voice. This wasn't a sloppy procedure, it was deliberate. You think if you keep quiet, we'll go easier on you? Monroe leaned in, her voice low and oily. I've had tougher ones than you, loudmouth types. You all start the same. Eyes wide, real brave. Then we shut you down. Simone raised her head. For the first time since the arrest, she spoke. You don't know who you're dealing with. Monroe blinked, caught off guard by her calm. Then she chuckled. Cute. You people always think someone cares. She stepped behind Simone and gripped her cuffs tighter, pushing her forward. They moved through a back hallway, cold, pale green walls lined with rusting lockers and a smell of institutional rot that bleach couldn't hide. Officers passed by, barely noticing, or maybe choosing not to. In a corner before the cells, Monroe stopped. You're gonna learn your place real fast, she whispered, and shoved Simone hard into the wall. Her head cracked against the cinder block. A hot, blinding pain shot through her skull as the world tilted. Her knees buckled. She barely caught herself on the edge of a bench bolted to the wall. She tasted metal. Blood trickled from her scalp down the back of her neck. Still cuffed, Simone slowly turned her head and looked at Monroe through the haze. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She stared, and for a brief second, Monroe's smirk faltered. You're making a mistake, Simone said, voice sharp as broken glass. A big one. But Monroe straightened, rolling her eyes. Every damn one of you says that. She opened the cell door and shoved Simone inside. The clang of metal behind her was final. No explanation. No medical check, no acknowledgement of the injury on her head. Just a number, filed and forgotten. The cell was half full. 4 other women sat on benches, backs to the wall, expressions locked in versions of the same exhaustion. One of them, seated in the far corner, glanced up briefly, eyes narrowed, mouth still. She didn't speak. None of them did. Simone sat down, her head pounding. The blood had begun to dry in a slow trail across her temple. She looked around. The walls were scuffed with old fingerprints. The camera above was aimed at the door, not the cell. Of course. She leaned her head back, wincing at the pain. She wasn't going to get medical attention. Not here. Not tonight. This wasn't about law enforcement anymore. It was controlled. Humiliation. Erasure. What they wanted was to reduce her into silence, to fold her into the system as just another black woman who looked out of place in the wrong zip code. But Simone Caldwell had grown up in silence. She'd survived it, learned how to listen deeper than most. And right now, what she heard was more dangerous than any blow to the head. This department didn't fear oversight. It didn't fear exposure, because it believed no one would come looking. She could feel the bruises rising under her skin. But what really throbbed wasn't physical. It was the realization that this wasn't a few bad officers. It was structural, baked in, and they had been running it like a machine long before she ever stepped into this town. Her fingers curled into fists in her lap. They thought they had just booked a nameless woman in a torn blouse. They had no idea. The woman they'd shoved against that wall had access to federal databases, confidential case files, and the power to launch internal affairs investigations with a single phone call. But that would come later. For now, she let the silence work for her. In the corner of the cell, the woman who had first looked up now shifted on the bench. She leaned slightly toward Simone, her voice low but firm. "They hit you hard." Simone didn't respond. The woman nodded, understanding. "They do that. To the quiet ones." Simone glanced sideways. "Name's Letitia," the woman said. "You?" Simone took a beat, then replied, just as quiet, "Jane." Letitia studied her for a moment, then leaned back into her corner, the conversation hanging unfinished. But Simone had already felt it. There was more to Letitia than she let on, just like there was more to this place than brick and bars. Simone understood now. This wasn't a broken system. It was functioning exactly as designed, and she had just been logged into its bloodstream. Letitia's next words would start unraveling a story Simone wasn't ready to hear, but couldn't afford to ignore. The sound of keys faded, and with it, the last light from the hallway. The cell fell into a heavy kind of darkness, the kind that made time blur and thoughts sharpen. A busted ceiling vent hummed softly above, masking the silence that had blanketed the women since lights out. But Simone was wide awake, her head still throbbing from the blow hours earlier. Blood had dried at her hairline, crusting against her temple like the seal of a system that punished quietly and without remorse. Across from her, Letitia hadn't moved for a long while. Her eyes were open, unfocused, staring through the crack in the metal door like she was waiting for something, or someone. Finally, her voice broke the stillness. "Have you ever been cuffed for asking a question?" she said, flat but tinged with bitterness. "Not just stared down, but shackled? Humiliated?" Simone didn't respond. Not yet. Letitia didn't need the answer anyway. She wasn't looking for agreement. She was offering a history lesson. "I asked why my tax dollars went to a precinct that couldn't keep their damn cameras on. That's all," she continued, shifting to sit up against the wall. "One question. At a town hall, with the press watching. That was enough." Simone turned slightly, watching her in the dim light. "What happened?" Letitia gave a hollow laugh, dry and clipped. 2 nights later, I'm walking out of a planning meeting. There's a cruiser sitting across the street. Nothing unusual. I'd seen them tail me before, but that night they had a reason." She rubbed the back of her neck, voice tightening. "They said they found cocaine in my bag. I don't even drink. Never touched anything heavier than caffeine. But I was black. I was vocal. I was effective. And worse, I was organizing." Simone felt a knot form in her chest. Letitia's name had passed her desk when she was first briefed on the district, one of several community leaders flagged during her transition into the role. Back then, she'd made a mental note to reach out to Letitia Brooks, maybe bring her in as a community liaison. She remembered thinking, this woman knows how to move people. Now, that woman was sitting across from her, barefoot on a stained concrete floor, wearing the same disposable scrubs issued to detainees no one planned to believe. Letitia sighed and leaned forward, resting her arms on her knees. You know the worst part? They didn't even try that hard. Sloppy paperwork, no witnesses, the kind of setup that wouldn't last 10 minutes in a courtroom if you had the right lawyer and the right skin tone. She looked up at Simone. I had neither. Simone stayed silent, but her mind was racing. She remembered the arrest summary. Anonymous tip. Substance recovered. No comment from the suspect. She had flagged it then as a suspicious, but she'd been knee-deep in command transitions, budget briefings, and city council meetings. She hadn't dug further. She had trusted the paper trail. That realization hit her harder than Monroe's elbow ever could. Letitia spoke again, more quietly now. They didn't just throw me in here. They erased me, took me off the board, stopped my work cold. Simone's throat tightened. Your work? Letitia's expression hardened. I was coordinating a statewide initiative for mandatory body cams, not just policy, funding, procurement, integration into case reviews. We had 20 city councils on board. Westridge was next. Simone leaned back, the air in the cell suddenly colder. This wasn't incidental. Letitia wasn't just a woman who'd been silenced. She had been surgically removed by a department that saw her advocacy as a threat to its impunity. And now, that same department had grabbed Simone off the road, erased her ID, fabricated charges, and locked her up under false pretenses. Not because of a mistake, but because it was the standard operating procedure. You kept pushing, Simone said softly. Letitia glanced at her, unsure what she meant. You asked the wrong question at the right time, and they answered the only way they knew how. Letitia nodded once. Exactly. The two women sat in silence for a few long beats. Outside, someone shouted from another cell. A distant slam echoed through the corridor. Somewhere above them, pipes rattled with the sound of an old system wheezing through another night. Then Letitia tilted her head, looking Simone over again. You're different, she said. You don't belong here. Simone hesitated. She couldn't say more. Not yet. Letitia smirked, sensing the tension. Don't worry. I'm not asking questions. Just, I know what fear looks like. And I know what fury looks like. You're not scared. You're calculating. Simone let that hang in the air. Is that a bad thing? She finally asked. Letitia smiled, but it was a sad smile. Depends who you're calculating against. Simone shifted her gaze back, to the door. The screws on the metal plate were rusting. The walls had marks where names had been carved and painted over. Generations of women had passed through here, some with stories, others with screams, and still it went on. A system designed to silence, refined to perfection. But now, it had locked up the wrong person, twice. Letitia wasn't a victim of circumstance, she was a target of design. And now, so was Simone. But what the system didn't anticipate was that the two of them would end up in the same cell. Simone's mind sparked with the face of a former student, an IT specialist at City Hall who owed her a favor, one she was ready to cash in. Simone didn't say a word when they handed her back her phone, her ID, and a condescending good night at the exit gate. She had spent 36 hours inside a holding cell meant to dehumanize, surrounded by walls thick with unspoken rules that didn't need to be written to be obeyed. Her wrists were still bruised from the zip ties, her head still sore from the hit she never got treated, and her silence, that had been strategic, because the real war wouldn't be fought inside those walls, it would start outside. At exactly 11:46 p.m., Simone tapped on the locked side door of a city building tucked behind Westridge Town Hall. A single red light flickered above the security panel. A second later, the door buzzed open. Terrence Blake, hoodie half-zipped, sleep-deprived eyes behind thick glasses peeked through the narrow opening. "You look like hell," he said, stepping aside. "Feels worse," Simone replied. They moved quickly down a back hallway and into a small utility room converted into a makeshift IT base. Monitors hummed softly against the walls. There were wires taped to the ceiling, a half-eaten sandwich next to a stack of external drives, and a hand-scrawled scene on the corkboard that read, "Nothing here is legal, but it's all true." Terrence dropped into his desk chair and cracked his knuckles. "Deputy Chief Rowan. That's a name I haven't heard since he shut down our transparency bill 2 years ago. What are we looking for?" "Everything," Simone said. She didn't explain the details. Not yet. Not what she'd seen. Not what they'd done. But she told him enough. Rowan was more than just a bad cop. He was the rotting core of a department built on silence, fear, and carefully orchestrated lies. Terrence didn't need much convincing. "Okay," he muttered, already typing. "Let's go hunting." What followed was a dance between speed and stealth. Terrence bypassed city firewalls, pulled archived emails from city servers, and traced flagged access logs buried under layers of encryption. Simone stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the screen as names began to surface. Dates, IP addresses. Within an hour, they had their first breadcrumb. Awarded grant funding, supposedly for a community redevelopment initiative, Terrence said, highlighting a transfer to a shell company named Unity Heights Foundation. "Sounds noble," Simone muttered. Terrence clicked into its financials. "Except it's fake. Registered 2 weeks after Rowan took office as deputy chief. No office, no staff, just a P.O. box, and withdrawals in the name of security consulting fees. Want to guess who signed the checks?" He turned the screen toward her. Rowan's name, and under it, Mayor Ross. Simone leaned in. Her jaw clenched. "So that's how he bought silence." "More like loyalty," Terrence replied. "That account's paid out to a dozen department heads, 3 city council members, and, oh, you'll love this." He opened a file labeled White Book. Inside was a folder titled Heritage and Cultural Training. A quick scroll revealed it wasn't training at all, but a manifesto. Rowan's personal notes. Hundreds of pages spanning years. "Wait," Simone said slowly. "What is this?" Terrence didn't answer. He just clicked. On screen appeared a passage in Rowan's own words. "The African race has proven ungovernable by civil logic. History proves they thrive in chaos, resist order, and must be subdued for safety to reign. Until leadership is restored to its rightful balance, this nation will crumble." Simone felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected this level of candor. This wasn't just a racist cop with unchecked authority. This was ideology, organized and refined. Another entry read, "Promote officers who preserve image, silence those who deviate, elevate white figures publicly, neutralize threats quietly. Community trust is illusion. Control is currency." She stepped back, disgust curling in her stomach. "You were right," she whispered. "He's not just protecting bad cops, he's designing them." Terrence nodded grimly. "And the mayor?" He opened the subfolder. Complicit. Every quarter she signed off on community support packages, all routed through this phantom foundation. It's not just hush money, it's coordinated suppression. Photos began popping up, event images where Ross stood beside Rowan, handing out checks at Unity forums. Behind them stood officers Simone had seen in the holding cells, some of the same officers who'd pulled her from her car and shoved her to the pavement, some who'd looked her in the eye and laughed. This wasn't negligence. This was a network, a closed loop of power, racism, and polished PR campaigns, designed to pacify the public while black voices were strategically crushed behind bars, or buried under false charges, or erased completely. "I need every file," Simone said. "Every memo, every withdrawal, every surveillance point. I'm downloading it all now," Terrence replied. "But, Simone," he turned, hesitating. "This isn't just going to get someone fired. This could burn down the whole damn administration." She looked him square in the face. "That's the point." He held her gaze, then turned back to the keyboard. Outside, sirens passed in the distance, shrill and fleeting. But inside that dim room, something seismic had shifted. Simone hadn't just seen the system from the inside. She now had the blueprints of its decay. She could trace every thread back to the rot that kept it functioning. Rowan, the mayor, the cops who walked with impunity, the money that fueled it, and the lies that protected it all. But this wasn't going to be a press release or a polite resignation. She wasn't aiming for exposure. She was planning demolition, and the foundation was cracking. As Terrence's drive finished copying the files, Simone realized something deeper. This wasn't just about Westridge. The sickness wasn't isolated. It was systemic. It lived in the blueprints, in the silence, in the chain of command. Racism wasn't a symptom. It was policy. The studio lights inside Morning Justice were always a little too warm, the smiles just a little too fixed. It was the kind of program built for comfort. Coffee mugs, soft lighting, and questions that always ended with a laugh. But behind the floral set dressing and filtered optimism, Simone saw it now for what it was. A machine built to dull the edge of truth. She sat in the green room with a faux leather folder clutched tight in her lap, her curls tucked beneath a simple tan wig, dark-framed glasses resting low on her nose. Her clothes were bland, office neutral. The producers thought she was just another community liaison, here to discuss the future of public trust in law enforcement. They had no idea. Simone watched through narrowed eyes as Gwen Harlow, the station's justice correspondent, read from a teleprompter with syrup in her voice. Coming up, a deeper look at recent community tensions following what officials are calling a regrettable misunderstanding involving a young girl and officers responding to a security alert. Regrettable misunderstanding. Simone's knuckles tightened around her notepad. A 12-year-old girl had been zip-tied on a hot curb. Simone herself had been beaten, detained, humiliated, and this woman in a pastel blouse was smoothing it over with word choices designed to pacify suburban guilt. Gwen clicked her mic off during the break and turned to Simone with a warm smile. "So glad you could join us today. I know it's been a tense week." Simone studied her face. Gwen was practiced, polished, her words wrapped in concern, but her eyes never blinked too long. "I'm here to tell the truth," Simone said flatly. Gwen gave a diplomatic nod. "Of course, and we're committed to airing both sides. The community deserves to hear every perspective." There it was, both sides, as if racial violence had a counterpart that needed defending. Simone glanced at the table beside Gwen's desk. A photo frame sat crookedly behind a stack of cue cards. It showed Gwen at a holiday party, wine glass in hand, arm slung casually around Officer Harmon. And, just behind them, Officer Walsh, grinning mid-laugh. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a reveal. "You know Harmon well?" Simone asked, casually. Gwen hesitated. "Oh, we've crossed paths at city events. Everyone knows everyone in media and law enforcement, especially here in Westridge." "And Walsh?" Simone pressed. Gwen's eyes flickered for half a second. "Just long enough. Officer Walsh is passionate, dedicated, like many on the force," Gwen replied, before glancing toward the director's booth. "We're back in 30. Simone leaned in slightly, her voice cool. "You're not just reporting this story. You're controlling its oxygen supply." Gwen's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting I'm not impartial?" "I'm suggesting," Simone said, "that your job isn't to inform, it's to soften. You're the velvet glove around an iron fist, and you smile while the boot comes down." Gwen's microphone lit green. "And we're back," she said sweetly. "Our guest today, recent advocate in the conversation around race and policing. Ma'am, you've raised some serious concerns this week." "I've raised facts," Simone said, eyes locked on the camera. "Facts that were never going to surface through this station." Gwen's smile froze. "In the past 48 hours," Simone continued, "I've uncovered a network of corruption within Westridge PD. Officers have fabricated charges, deleted body cam footage, and brutalized civilians, then buried it under statements like misunderstanding or community tension. Your station called the assault of a 12-year-old girl a mistake. You called my unlawful arrest an overreaction. But these weren't accidents. They were policy and practice. Behind the camera, a producer waved frantically, signaling to cut. Gwen kept the segment rolling with a forced laugh. "Strong opinions, Simone," she said. "But do you have evidence to support these claims?" "I do," Simone said, "but you won't be the one to tell that story." And with that, she stood, unhooked her mic, and walked off set. No one stopped her. Outside the studio, Simone didn't head to her car. She took a side street, ducked into a narrow alley behind an old pawn shop, and slipped through a back entrance she hadn't used in years. The air inside the room was thick with dust and the stale hum of old equipment. It had once been a neighborhood outreach office, abandoned after funding was reallocated. But tonight, it would serve as the first real war room. She unzipped her duffel bag and spread out the files Terrence had printed, financial statements, Rowan's white supremacist write-ins, surveillance logs. She pinned names and faces to the wall, connected them with string and scrawled notes in permanent marker. One line from Gwen's segment played in her head on loop. Regrettable misunderstanding. Behind that phrase was a machine. A system built not only of police departments but of broadcasters, donors, politicians, and cultural gatekeepers. Each played their part. Each insulated the other. And now, Simone saw Gwen for what she really was. Not an observer, but an enabler in full makeup. A false ally who used her proximity to power to distract, dilute, and deflect. A traitor in a silk blouse. Simone wrote Gwen's name in red on the board. Just beneath it, she scribbled, "Soft power is still power." She picked up her phone, opened a secure messaging app, and typed a single line to Letitia and Terrence. "The media's compromised. We don't ask anymore. We take the mic." She hit send. The voice that delivers the news isn't always neutral. It's often chosen to sound like comfort while delivering control. In Westridge, even the softest voice is part of the war machine. Racism doesn't always march in uniform. Sometimes it wears a necklace and nods sympathetically. As the files printed and voices aligned in the darkened room, Simone knew it was time. The truth needed force and a new kind of army. She gathered her coat, grabbed the duffel, and headed out into the cold, back to the chapel where the resistance was quietly waiting to rise. Monday mornings at Westridge PD were usually all bark and bravado. Paperwork slung on desks, offhand complaints about soft judges, and the familiar clatter of coffee mugs with crude slogans. But this morning was different. The squad room, usually buzzing with swagger, sat in thick, expectant silence. Roll call was about to begin. Officer Darla Monroe leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her clipboard with a half smirk. Officer Walsh yawned, half focused on the latest stats from the property crime surge that just so happened to only occur in black neighborhoods. No one looked particularly alert. No one expected a shakeup. Then the door opened. Boots, black polish, military sharp. They hit the floor with a rhythm that silenced even the humming of the fluorescent lights overhead. And when Simone Caldwell stepped into the room, it wasn't just a new face walking into roll call. It was a reckoning. Her badge was on full display. Her uniform was crisp, clean, and unmistakably high rank. Chief's insignia gleaming like a mirror daring them to look at themselves. The click of her heels was the only sound. 10 officers turned their heads. 4 stiffened. 1 dropped his coffee. But it was Officer Quinn Walsh who broke the spell first, eyes narrowing as he leaned forward with disbelief stitched into his voice. "Who the hell are you?" Simone didn't answer. Not at first. She walked straight to the head of the table, placed a single folder down, and slowly slid off her leather gloves. Then, without blinking, she reached into her breast pocket and pulled out her ID. She let it drop onto the table with a quiet thud. "I'm the one you called that girl," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "And, starting today, I'm your boss." A hush fell like a slab of concrete. Officer Monroe coughed, confused. Wait a second. This is some kind of—" "No," Simone cut in. "It's not. She locked eyes with each face in the room. "I was appointed as Westridge's new police chief 3 weeks ago. The mayor delayed the public rollout, said he wanted to manage reactions, and I see now he knew exactly what he was talking about." Officer Walsh laughed once, bitterly. "This is a joke." Simone turned to him, gazing flat. "You cuffed me on the side of Highway 18, Officer Walsh. You said I looked like the type. You called me impulsive, aggressive, and when I was face down in the dirt, you chuckled and said you'd seen my kind before." He shifted in his seat, suddenly aware of the other eyes watching him. "You dragged me from my vehicle without cause," she continued. "You searched my body like you were entitled to it, and then you locked me in a cell without a single charge, because you thought you could, because you thought no one would come looking for someone like me." Officer Monroe cleared her throat, voice suddenly small. "There were procedural concerns. You didn't identify yourself as law enforcement." "I didn't have to," Simone said sharply. "I wasn't undercover. I was a black woman in jeans, and that, in your eyes, was enough." One of the rookies in the back swallowed hard. No one else dared speak. Simone stepped closer to the board. She pulled down the whiteboard marker and wrote in bold letters, "Culture is policy." Then she circled the word culture. "This department has protected itself from within for too long. I've seen the emails, the erased body cam footage, the whispered warnings, the false reports." She turned, her voice now lower but far more dangerous. "This isn't a wake-up call. It's an audit. Every desk, every case, every complaint. Starting today, there will be no more blind eyes, no more cover stories, and no more boys' clubs. If you're not here to serve and protect all citizens of Westridge, resign. If you want to test me, don't." No one moved, because for the first time they understood. She wasn't here to survive their system. She was here to dismantle it. Officer Walsh shifted again, something flashing behind his eyes, panic disguised as arrogance. "You think a badge makes you bulletproof?" he muttered, mostly to himself. Simone heard it anyway. "No," she said evenly, "but it makes me visible, which is more than I can say for the people you've hurt and tried to erase." She grabbed the folder she'd brought in and dropped it on the table. Photos spilled out, documents, screenshots, and one unmistakable image. Officer Monroe stepping on the back of Simone's neck in the holding cell. "Every file in here is backed up," Simone said, "in cloud storage and physical drives with the DOJ." She turned to leave, but not before one last look over her shoulder. "I gave you the chance to change by example. You chose to challenge me instead. So now I lead, and you follow, or you fall." She walked out without another word, and just like that, the room that once mocked her now sat buried beneath the weight of silence, shame, and fear. Every man and woman in that room had underestimated her. They saw a woman, they saw black skin, they saw someone to ignore. But what they failed to see, until it was far too late, was the storm she carried beneath her calm. As Simone crossed the parking lot, an unmarked patrol car 2 blocks away came to life. Its lights stayed off, its engine didn't rev. But inside, a voice whispered through a radio. She made her move. "Activate Protocol 9. The door to the evidence control room hissed shut behind Simone with a heavy click, sealing her inside a chamber where truth came to die. Or, if she was lucky, to be reborn. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with low static, flickering slightly as she stepped between rows of secure terminals and locked archives. This room wasn't part of the public-facing side of Westridge PD. It was buried under layers of clearance codes, password gates, and a strict eyes-only policy. But Simone Caldwell had just rewritten the rules. Terrence Blake was already waiting, hunched over a console in the back corner of the room. His hoodie was up, but the stress in his posture betrayed him. He didn't look up when she entered. "You were right," he said, eyes locked on the screen. "They tried to nuke everything." Simone walked slowly toward him, each step echoing off the linoleum. "Define everything. Every digital trace of your arrest. The traffic stop, the holding cell, The internal logs say the files were corrupted during transfer. He made air quotes without smiling. Convenient timing, huh? She leaned over his shoulder. Show me. Terrence tapped through a string of directories, each one emptier than the last. These are the primary data vaults tied to Officer Monroe's and Officer Walsh's body cams. There should be time-stamped footage from the dash cam at 3:42 p.m., the moment they stopped you on Highway 18. Then the body cam streams from the booking process. Nothing. All gone. Simone's jaw clenched. She wasn't surprised. Disgusted, yes, but not surprised. They're scrubbing the story before it spreads, she muttered. Standard procedure when the badge is guilty and the victim's black. Terrence gave her a grim nod. But I didn't stop at the public system. He slid a thumb drive into a hidden port on the underside of his terminal. The screen blinked, then lit up with a different interface, bare bones, encrypted, and untraceable. This, he said, is a backup I installed 3 years ago. After I saw what happened to Letitia Brooks, I didn't trust them then. I sure as hell don't trust them now. Simone placed a hand on his shoulder. You just became the most important person in this building. Terrence hit play. The screen flickered to life, and then it began. No music, no editing, just the raw, unfiltered truth. There she was, Simone Caldwell, pulled out of her vehicle under a blazing sun, her hands raised, her voice calm. Officer Walsh threw her against the hood. Officer Monroe rifled through her pockets. A moment later, a sharp push sent her stumbling to the pavement. Terrence fast-forwarded. Now, the holding cell. Dim lighting, concrete walls, no other inmates. Monroe entered. No gloves, no paperwork, just fury. She grabbed Simone by the collar and shoved her to the ground. Simone tried to sit up, but Monroe's boot came down hard. On her neck, time froze. Simone turned away from the screen, but not fast enough to miss the crunching sound her skull made against the tile. Terrence paused the video. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "They would have killed you if they knew who you were." "They still might," Simone replied, her voice low but unwavering. "But now I've got proof, and they've got nowhere left to hide." She took a step back from the monitor, squaring her shoulders. "This isn't just about me. It's about Letitia, about Jada, about every black kid who's been told they fit the description or got slammed to the pavement for daring to exist." Terrence nodded. "So, what's the next move?" She didn't hesitate. "We go public." He arched an eyebrow. "You sure? The mayor's already trying to contain this. The DA's office won't be on your side, and the media's compromised. I don't need their permission," she said. "I need a stage." Terrence opened a drawer and slid her the drive. "Then take this, and take them down." She pocketed it carefully, locking eyes with him. "You're not just some kid with a keyboard, Terrence. You just pulled the pin on a grenade they never saw coming." He gave her a tired smile. "Then let's make sure it goes off in front of everyone." Simone turned to leave, but paused at the door. "They erased the footage because they feared exposure," she said. "Let's show them what fear really feels like." And with that, she was gone. The boot on her neck had been real. The pain had been real. But now, the evidence was just as real and far more dangerous. What they'd tried to bury would become the shovel she used to dig up everything. Outside, Simone pulled out her phone and began typing one message, short and sharp. It went out to every news outlet, every community leader, and every civil rights attorney she could trust. Press conference. Tomorrow. City Hall. 10 a.m. You'll want to see this. The clock struck 10 as the final row of folding chairs filled in the Westridge Community Hall. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, glinting off the camera lenses and the microphones clustered in front of the stage. Beneath the polished wood rafters and decorative banners reading "Justice," "Unity," "Accountability," something electric pulsed in the air. Simone Caldwell stood at the center podium, flanked by Letitia Brooks on one side and Terrence Blake on the other. Her police uniform was immaculate. Her badge gleamed, and in her hand was a flash drive, small, silver, and deadly. She scanned the crowd. Reporters lined the front rows, notebooks open and ready. Local activists filled the middle rows. some of them wearing shirts with Letitia's mugshot, others holding up signs that read #BodyCamJustice and Protect Black Lives, Not Blue Lies. And scattered among them, ordinary citizens sat in uneasy silence, unaware that they were seconds away from seeing their city turned inside out. Simone tapped the mic. Her voice rang out, clear and direct. "Good morning. My name is Simone Caldwell, Chief of Police for the city of Westridge." A ripple moved through the room. Some whispered, some leaned forward, some widened their eyes as recognition struck. She didn't wait. "Last week, I was arrested. I was assaulted. I was placed in a jail cell under false pretenses. Not because I broke any law, not because I posed any threat, but because I fit a profile. Black, assertive, and unafraid." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the drive. "And today, I'm going to show you what they tried to hide." She nodded to Terrence. He stepped forward, plugged the drive into the laptop beside her, and clicked play. The projector flared to life. What followed was brutal. The footage of Simone's arrest, Officer Walsh slamming her against the hood, Monroe dragging her across concrete, the steel clink of cuffs against her wrists. Then came the scene from the jail cell. The boot, the scream, the silence. The room gasped. A woman in the third row clasped her hands over her mouth. Terrence switched slides. Now emails. Dozens, then hundreds. Correspondence between Deputy Chief Rowan, the mayor, and select city council members. Hidden campaign donations. Funds funneled through an organization called the Guardians, a civic coalition that operated like a fraternity of control, protecting officers, smearing protesters, silencing dissent. Finally, Terrence pulled up the internal watch list, names of activists, educators, journalists, most of them black, some of them died. Simone took the mic again. Her voice had sharpened. "This isn't about one arrest. This isn't about me. It's about a culture, baked into the walls of this city's justice system, that treats black dignity as a threat and white supremacy as tradition." The room was dead silent. Then a new voice broke through. "Lies!" Officer Rowan stormed through the side door like a blade cut in hire. He was dressed in plain clothes but wore his authority like a weapon. "You're disgracing this city," he barked. "None of that footage is authenticated. That data could have been fabricated. This is slander." "No, it's a damn coup." Reporters scrambled to capture his outburst. Cameras turned to him, clicking furiously, but Simone didn't move. "Nice of you to join us, Rowan," she said evenly. "Feel free to explain the slush fund routed through the Guardians, or how Officer Monroe's body cam conveniently malfunctioned during my assault, or why I'm on a surveillance list right next to Letitia Brooks." Rowan's face flushed crimson. "You don't belong here. You're not from Westridge. You're trying to burn this city down to build your own little empire." "I don't need to build an empire," she shot back. "I'm trying to tear one down." He took a step forward, and then it happened. A man stood up in the fifth row, mid-40s, brown jacket, gray beard, hands trembling. "They did it to me too," he said, voice cracking. "Pulled me over for a broken taillight, dragged me out in front of my kid, said I reached for a weapon. There was no weapon. All eyes turned to him. A woman rose next. My son got suspended for recording a cop slamming his friend at school. They called it interference with an officer. He was 13. One by one, they stood, dozens of them. Stories spilled out like water breaching a dam. A grandmother who was searched at church for smelling like weed. A college student who was forced to strip on the side of the road. A teacher who lost her job after speaking up at a council meeting. Rowan's jaw tightened. The wave of truth was too loud now. Letitia stepped to the mic beside Simone. "You tried to erase us. One arrest at a time, one lie at a time. But this is what surviving looks like." The crowd clapped, then roared. Rowan's last weapon, intimidation, crumbled beneath the weight of living witnesses. Simone turned back to the podium, calm, collected, unstoppable. I'm officially calling on the Department of Justice and the FBI to launch a full investigation into the West Ridge Police Department, its leadership, and its affiliated political networks. More applause, more cameras. Rowan turned on his heel and stormed out the side door, his exit the clearest admission of guilt yet. But Simone knew better than to celebrate. One man walked out, but the system that made him was still seated in every high office and city contract. For every Rowan that fled the room, 10 more would wait in silence, sharpening their teeth. The war had just become visible. As the lights dimmed and the crowd began to disperse, Simone felt her phone buzz. A single, unmarked message. No name, no subject line, only 4 words. You crossed a line. She exhaled. Slow, steady, and turned to Letitia. They're not done. Letitia nodded. Neither are we. The hum of the overhead lights in Simone Caldwell's office had never felt so loud. Outside the windows of Westridge PD's headquarters, the city was draped in silence, a silence that did not soothe, but suffocated. It was after midnight. The conference table was cluttered with files, a half-eaten sandwich, and a laptop blinking with unfinished security patches, but none of it mattered anymore. Her phone vibrated again. No caller ID, no preview, just a message that cut colder than the night. Stop now, or you'll disappear like the rest. Simone stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. She didn't need to ask who the rest referred to. Whistleblowers, activists, junior officers who once raised concerns, all conveniently relocated, silenced, or lost in bureaucratic footnotes. She turned the phone face down. Letitia's chair across from her sat empty, still warm from when she'd left just 2 hours earlier to head home. Simone glanced at the clock, 12:47 a.m. Then the knock came. Sharp, desperate. Terrence burst through the door, out of breath, his hoodie damp with rain. It's Letitia. Simone stood up instantly. What happened? She's in the hospital, hit and run. Car ran a red light, plowed into her side. Driver never stopped. Witness said it looked intentional, like they were aiming for her. Simone's stomach twisted. Where is she now? West Memorial. She's alive, but banged up bad. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder. They're keeping her overnight. Simone grabbed her coat, halfway to the door when Terrence added, Wait, there's more. She froze. She got out of jail legally. Judge granted the release after the footage you leaked, but she didn't make it home. Someone knew her route. Someone wanted to make a point. Simone's hands clenched. They're accelerating. Terrence nodded grimly. You made the first dent in the armor and now they're cracking down. I got followed last night leaving City Hall. Unmarked car. Same model that's registered under a city contractor who donated to the Guardians. Simone looked away, the weight crushing. This wasn't politics anymore. This was war, and she was dragging everyone who stood beside her into the blast zone. She sat back down, breathing hard, her heart a riot behind her ribs. You still have the burner servers? Terrence nodded. All our backups are safe, double encrypted. I'm mirroring all downloads off Westridge PD's body cam system every night. Simone nodded slowly. Good. Keep them dark. No signals. No connections. If I vanish tomorrow, I need someone who can keep releasing the truth. You're not going anywhere, Terrence said, voice cracking slightly. They don't get to win like that. But Simone had been in this game long enough to know power like this doesn't flinch. It retaliates. She glanced at her desk. There, beside her badge, was the flash drive from the press conference, and underneath it, a photo of her father in uniform, a civil rights lawyer who had died defending 3 teenagers beaten by police in the 90s. His courtroom victories were legendary. But it was his funeral that drew national attention, because no one from the department he sued ever faced jail time. You always knew the price, Simone whispered, staring at his image. I just didn't think I'd have to pay it in blood. She rose again, slower this time, and walked to the window. A black SUV was parked across the street. Engine on, lights off. It hadn't moved in the last hour. She knew because she'd been watching it. I'm being watched, she murmured. Terrence joined her, peering through the blinds. You think it's them? I don't think. I know. She turned back to the room. Her voice changed, more resolved now. They're not just trying to protect a department. They're protecting a belief that black people don't belong in control. That truth is only dangerous when it comes from someone they can't control. Terrence hesitated, then pulled out a small envelope. This came in the station mail drop. No return address. Simone opened it. A single slip of paper. Typed, no signature. We've been watching too. Not everyone in the Bureau plays by their rules. Meet alone. No recordings. Corner booth. Holden Diner. Tomorrow. Midnight. Her pulse thudded. FBI? Terrence asked quietly. Simone folded the note. Or someone pretending to be. You're going? She looked at him and answered without pause. Yes. He didn't argue, just swallowed hard. She sat down again, this time more centered, as if bracing against the storm that had fully arrived. We prepare for every possibility. Tomorrow I meet this contact. You stay on digital lockdown. No more back and forths with City Hall. They've got eyes inside. And Letitia? I'll visit her. Let her know she's not alone. Terrence stood silent for a long moment, then said quietly, They're hitting us because we're scaring them. That means we're doing something right. No, Simone corrected, meeting his gaze. That means they're about to hit harder. Every truth they exposed was now a target painted on their backs, and the clearer the truth became, the closer danger crept. But Simone knew this wasn't the time to flinch. The next night, under the flickering neon of Holden Diner, Simone stepped into the empty booth, alone, only to find someone already waiting with the folder marked Classified, DOJ Internal Affairs, and a whisper, You're not the only one they tried to bury. The wind swept dry leaves across the cracked asphalt of the abandoned lot like whispers. Flickering lights from a rusted street lamp barely illuminated the skeletal remains of the old train station nearby, once a portal of movement, now a graveyard of memory. Simone Caldwell waited alone, hood pulled low, spine tight with anticipation. A black sedan crept silently into view, headlights off. She didn't flinch. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in his mid-50s, tall, composed with salt and pepper hair, and eyes that had seen too many truths to flinch anymore. He wore no badge, no weapon in sight, just a brown leather coat and a manila envelope pressed close to his chest. Simone Caldwell? His voice was low and clear, almost too calm for a meeting like this. You're the one who reached out? She asked. He nodded. Henry Lockwood, FBI, Division of Internal Oversight. What's left of it. Simone studied him. You picked a hell of a location. He offered a dry smile. I'm not sure who's watching my apartment anymore. Safer here. Simone crossed her arms, still wary. Why me? Lockwood held up the envelope. Because you're doing what no one in my department will. You're drawing blood. He handed her the file. Inside were 3 names, 3 headshots, 3 personnel reports stripped of their lies. She flipped through them, her breath slowing as each face stared back. Sergeant Blake Rourke, Tech Specialist, Body Cam Administrator, Lieutenant Nolan Case, Head of Internal Investigations, sweeps misconduct reports before they reach the mayor's desk. Captain Darla Monroe. Simone's fingers froze. She didn't need the summary. She'd felt Monroe's boot on her neck, had memorized the curve of that smirk as her head slammed into concrete. All 3, Lockwood continued, are part of an informal cabal inside Westridge PD, but their ties run further. They're suspected members of an organization called the Guardians, not just a nickname. It's real. Leaked memos suggest this network has supporters inside the DOJ, local courts, and even Congress. Simone's eyes didn't leave the pages. Why haven't you gone public? Lockwood sighed, looking out toward the shadows. Because 2 of those memos were traced back to aides of sitting senators. One from South Carolina, one from Idaho. We go public without proof, and the case dies in political fire. You need a fall, girl, Simone said coldly. No, he replied firmly. I need someone they fear more than me, someone they already underestimated. She closed the file. They're still working out of my building, Simone said. He nodded. "Monroe was in your morning briefing today, wasn't she?" Simone stared into the distance. She was 5 feet away. That's how close the rod is. The wind howled again, lifting dust and fragments of brittle paper around them. Lockwood stepped closer. "They're watching you, Chief. After the footage leak and the press conference, you've got maybe 3 days before they try again, and this time, it won't be warnings." Simone exhaled through her nose. "So why tell me this now?" Lockwood didn't blink. "Because we've lost 3 informants in the past 6 months. One disappeared, one overdosed, and the last died in a jail cell 2 hours after arrest." "Let me guess," Simone said. "The footage malfunctioned." He met her eyes. "Same as yours did. Same signature. Erased logs, scrambled backups, always on weekends when oversight staff is thin." Her jaw tightened. "They've got a system. They've got a blueprint," Lockwood said grimly, "and they've rehearsed it for years." She tapped the envelope against her palm. "What do you want from me, exactly?" "To survive," he answered. "To outlast them. I'll feed you what I can, off the record. You give me names, patterns, movements. We build an internal map, quietly. No emails, no calls, no signals they can trace." "And when we're ready?" she asked. "When we're ready," Lockwood said, "we release everything. One drop, timed with indictments. But you need to stay alive long enough to make it to that moment." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before an ambush. Simone finally tucked the file inside her jacket. "They're not just protecting officers. They're protecting an idea." He nodded solemnly. "The idea that power belongs to the few, and that the few doesn't include people who look like us." She looked at him again. "You ever been in a cage, Agent Lockwood?" He paused. "No, I have, and every second inside it, I thought about how I'd burn it down." She turned toward her car. But just before she opened the door, Lockwood called out, "Watch your back, Chief Caldwell." She nodded without looking. Back in the car, Simone drove through the sleeping streets of Westridge, her headlights carving through the dark. But the moment she turned into the precinct lot, her pulse spiked. The front entrance was dark, too dark. The motion sensor lights didn't flicker on. And when she reached her office upstairs, her worst fear materialized. The door was ajar, the lock shattered, papers strewn, cabinets emptied. Someone had already beaten her back, and now they weren't hiding anymore. She stepped into the wreckage and picked up one thing they left behind, a single photo, torn in half, of her with her father. The message was clear. They knew her bloodline, and they planned to end it. Simone went straight to her desk. Her personal laptop was still there, too neatly placed. That was the first clue. She powered it on. Within seconds, the screen blinked, then stayed black. Her cursor wouldn't move. Simone narrowed her eyes and flipped the laptop over. That's when she saw it. Tucked just under the battery compartment was a thin black tab connected to a device no larger than a stick of gum. A surveillance tab. She didn't breathe. Someone had been watching her, tracking her keystrokes, monitoring her files, every message, every search. She dropped it into an evidence bag and stood up just as her radio crackled to life. "Chief Caldwell, we've got something. Staff room. Emergency. Over." It was Officer Harmon. Her stomach dropped. She raced down the hall, her keys jangling in rhythm with her heartbeat. The break room door was open, and slumped by the sink, blood pooling beneath his head, was Elroy, the 64-year-old janitor who'd worked the night shift longer than some officers had held a badge. "Found him like this," Harmon said, arms crossed too casually, his tone too rehearsed. "He must have slipped." "On what?" Simone snapped. She crouched next to Elroy. A bruise had bloomed across his temple, far too clean to be from a fall. She checked for a pulse, faint but steady. His mop was lying upright in the corner, untouched. "Call an ambulance," she ordered, then looked up at Harmon. "And don't move a damn inch until it gets here." Harmon's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Back in her office, Simone scanned every corner, every vent, every shadow. Then she noticed something beneath her chair, A corner of paper slipped under the rug. She yanked it free. It wasn't just a printout. It was a tactical briefing. Operation Null Point. Phase 1. Deployment. 3 names were circled in red ink. Hers, Letitia Brooks, Terrence Blake, targeted for containment. No timestamps, no agency logo, just a watermark, the Guardians. She backed against the wall. Every nerve in her body screamed for action. They weren't just watching. They were moving. Now. And if Elroy hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time, the blood on the floor might have been hers. Simone knew this wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was a purge. And the only reason she was still breathing was because they wanted her to see it coming. She grabbed her burner phone and called Letitia. No answer. Tried Terrence. Straight to voicemail. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but urgency. She had to get them out of Westridge before sunrise. But one of them had already vanished. The headlights cut through the thick mist hanging over the broken pavement, casting elongated shadows against the crumbling facade of what used to be a rehab center. Now, it was nothing more than a forgotten building at the edge of Westridge. One the city conveniently erased from zoning records years ago. Simone pulled up slowly, her eyes locked on the faint glint of something near the steps. A handbag. She stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath her boots, and approached with controlled breath. The bag was unmistakable. Black leather, cracked near the seams. The initials LB, faint but clear. It was Letitia's. She crouched, opened the flap. Inside, her phone turned off, a set of keys, a printed flyer for an upcoming community justice panel, and a blood-streaked corner of a folded note that simply read, "You were warned." Simone stood still for a moment, the silence around her almost disrespectful. No cameras, no lights, no witnesses, just a public symbol of resistance erased like a bad memory, and the relics left behind like taunts. She pulled out her phone, hands tight, and dialed Lockwood. "Talk," he answered instantly. "She's gone," Simone said quietly, her voice flint. "Letitia's gone." Pause. "Tell me what you see." "I'm at an old rehab center off Briar and 9th. Her bag's here. Phone, too. And there's something else." She didn't want to say it, but she had to. "There's a room inside. Back wall. Message written in blood." A pause again. Longer this time. Then Lockwood's voice dropped lower, like he was talking through a locked vault. "What does it say?" Simone exhaled, slowly. "Truth doesn't save the stubborn." Lockwood didn't reply immediately. She could hear him breathing, calculating. Then finally, "That wasn't just a message for Letitia. That was for you." "I know," Simone said. "They want me off this. They're escalating." "They've already escalated," he said. "This is psychological warfare. They want you to feel alone, hunted." Simone walked through the building slowly as he spoke, a flashlight beam moving across graffiti, mold, collapsed insulation, until she reached the room again. She stepped closer to the wall. The message wasn't scrawled like an outburst. It was drawn with care. Each letter was sharp, intentional. Someone wanted her to stare at it. "They're not just silencing people," she said. "They're sending warnings, body cam files, testimonies, now blood on walls. All of it. The same goal. Control the narrative. Through fear. Which means," Lockwood added, "you're threatening that narrative." A rusted vent in the ceiling creaked above her, a cold draft slipping through. "She's not dead," Simone muttered. "They want us to think she is, but Letitia wouldn't go down without a sound. They took her." Lockwood's tone darkened. "You need to disappear for a while. You're exposed, and they're tightening the net." But Simone was already shaking her head. "No, I'm not running. If they're going to play this through the shadows, I'm dragging their faces into daylight." Lockwood was silent again. Then came his response. "You're planning something." "I'm using the same stage they used to lie," Simone said. "Media. This time it's not going to be a press release wrapped in polished language. It's going to be raw, uncut. The truth, ugly, undeniable, and broadcast to every damn screen in the county." Lockwood sighed. "They'll come harder after that. They already are." Simone ended the call and stood there alone, staring at the blood-streaked message one more time. The chill in the room felt personal, like the building itself remembered too much, like its walls had become accomplices in too many cover-ups. She pulled out her phone, opened the encrypted server Terrence had set up, and began uploading everything. Monroe's assault footage, Rowan's internal memos, officer misconduct files hidden for years. They wanted silence. They'd get a microphone. Letitia's disappearance wasn't just a warning, it was bait. And Simone, with fire behind her eyes, was about to flip the trap back on them. She walked out of the rehab center with a new plan. The same media that once framed black resistance as a threat would now be her weapon. The flickering overhead lights of Channel 6 studios hadn't blinked to life in over 3 weeks. Officially, the building was under internal compliance review, a bureaucratic phrase that covered for political pressure and sudden silence. The newsroom desks were still cluttered with coffee mugs, half-written scripts, and a sticky note that read, "Don't air anything that makes the mayor sweat." Simone stepped through the main entrance in a black hoodie and jeans, no badge, no title, just purpose. Behind her, Terrence carried a weathered tech kit slung over one shoulder, his fingers already tapping in commands on a burner laptop. Lockwood followed, face unreadable, his FBI badge tucked far from view. He was off book tonight, no oversight, no backup, just 3 people breaking into a network to bait the devil. "Terrence, how long?" Simone asked as she surveyed the dark studio. He looked up briefly. 10 minutes to bypass the fail-safes. We'll hijack the national affiliate stream through their emergency override. FCC guidelines say it's only for earthquakes or tornadoes. Guess tonight's a bit of both." She gave a tight nod. "Make sure the firewall routes back through D.C. I don't want Rowan tracing this to you." Lockwood glanced at the darkened control room. "And if he doesn't take the bait?" Simone's eyes didn't waver. "He will. Men like him always do. They can't resist justifying their hate. All you have to do is give them a microphone and a mirror." Terrence plugged the final cable in. The screens lit up, the studio awakening from its coma. Simone stepped in front of the anchor desk. No makeup, no script, just raw truth and the weight of a city watching. The red light blinked on. "We are live," Terrence whispered. Simone leaned forward and spoke directly into the camera. "In the last month, the city of Westridge has arrested a 12-year-old girl for walking while black. It has planted drugs on an activist who demanded transparency. It has beaten its own police chief unconscious in a jail cell and tried to erase the evidence." She held up a folder. "But we still have the footage and the names, and tonight we're not asking for permission, we're asking for witnesses. If you've ever been stopped, harassed, silenced, or brutalized by Westridge PD, call in. Right now. This is your line." She paused, then added with quiet intensity, "And for those who run this machine, if you think this ends here, you're wrong. We're not asking you to explain, we're giving you a chance to confess." The phone line lit up in seconds. Terrence filtered out noise, prioritizing flagged numbers. Then one call blinked, unknown source. "Private secure." He looked at Simone. She nodded. "Patch him in." The voice that came through the speaker was unmistakable. "Rowan." "Chief Caldwell," he said, dragging out her title like it tasted sour. "Or should I say, traitor?" Lockwood leaned forward, quietly starting the recording on his device. "Funny how you scream about racism when it's your people who can't follow the rules. You think putting on a badge makes you an equal? You think playing sheriff lets you rewrite the world? No, you're just another agitator in uniform." Simone didn't respond. She let him go on. "And don't think your little broadcast scares anyone. We have protocols for this. Special measures. To preserve order. And not just in Westridge. We're talking about protecting American identity. You understand me? We're safeguarding the structure that's kept this country clean for decades." There it was. The blood beneath the uniform. Not even hidden. Simone looked toward Terrence. He gave a silent thumbs up. Every word had been recorded. Compressed, encrypted, delivered to a secure FBI drive. Lockwood tapped his phone. "Go," he mouthed. From across the city, Unmarked SUVs surged into motion. The perimeter of Westridge PD locked down. At least 9 agents had been sitting quietly for days, waiting on that one explicit signal. Rowan's voice, tying ideology to violence. Back in the studio, Simone took a breath, leaned forward again, and stared into the camera one last time. You've just heard it yourself. Racism isn't just surviving in America. It's operational, strategic, embedded into systems with badges and funding. She paused, fire rising in her chest. But tonight, that system just told itself. She turned toward Lockwood. Your move. He nodded once. As Rowan's final words played across screens nationwide, the FBI stormed Westridge PD. For once, the loudest voice in the room had handed Simone everything she needed, on live television. But the war wasn't over yet, because as agents moved in, someone inside the station erased the entire personnel registry, and one of the officers had vanished. The hum of the early morning was broken not by birdsong or traffic, but by federal sirens screaming through the heart of Westridge. On the monitors lining the FBI mobile command van, blinking red dots marked every checkpoint. Westridge PD headquarters, Rowan's home in the suburbs, Officer Monroe's downtown apartment. One after another, strike teams moved with surgical precision. Doors splintered. Agents in tactical gear poured in. Voices rang out over bullhorns. Federal agents! Hands where we can see them. Inside the Westridge precinct, the chaos wasn't loud. It was stunned. Officers froze mid-step, their morning coffee forgotten, half-written reports blinking on terminals. When the first team stormed in, badges raised, no one fought back, because the real war had been psychological, and it had already been lost on national television the night before. Rowan's home was another matter. The gate had been locked. The surveillance cameras, previously a tool for intimidation, now caught a very different scene. Federal agents swarming through the flower beds, boots crunching gravel, their eyes scanning windows for movement. Rowan didn't run. He stood on the front porch in a pressed white dress shirt and slacks, a tumbler of bourbon still half full in his right hand. His expression was unreadable. Not panic, not remorse, just calculation, as if weighing the cost of silence against the currency of confession. He didn't speak until the cuffs clicked shut behind his back. I warned her, he muttered. The lead agent didn't reply. Outside Westridge PD, a crowd had begun to gather. It started small, 3 or 4 residents, cell phones out, eyes wide. Then the numbers grew. By the time news choppers arrived, there were hundreds. Some held up signs scrawled with names. Letitia Brooks, Jamil Carson, Ania Rhodes, names that hadn't been spoken on the nightly news until now, names scrubbed from records or locked behind sealed indictments. And then the chant began. Not justice. Not our truth. Inside the building, Simone stood in full uniform, flanked by FBI agents. Rowan was being walked through the main hallway, the same one where he'd once strolled past junior officers, nodding smugly like a king surveying his kingdom. Now, every step echoed like an indictment. He looked smaller in handcuffs, not weak, just diminished, as if the architecture itself rejected him now. Simone waited in the atrium, just beneath the precinct seal mounted on the wall, to protect and serve. The irony didn't need to be spoken. When Rowan came into view, the cameras followed. Reporters lined the sidewalk. News vans beamed the moment across the country. And for once, Simone didn't blink. She stepped forward, stood squarely in front of him, and asked, not in anger, but with the kind of calm that cut deeper than rage, "Do you remember her? The woman you ordered locked up because she looked at the wrong officer the wrong way?" Rowan didn't answer. His jaw clenched. His mouth moved, almost involuntarily, but no sound came. He didn't deny it, didn't even look confused, just aware that he wasn't in charge of the story anymore. He was the headline now, and the silence said everything. It wasn't humility. It wasn't a regret. It was the sound of a man who knew, deep in the marrow, that he had lost the only thing he'd ever truly worshipped: control. The FBI agents moved him along. Monroe followed close behind, wrists bound, her lips split from resisting arrest. She didn't get the cameras. She didn't get the questions. She didn't get remembered. Rowan did. As they were loaded into black SUVs and driven away, the crowd outside swelled to both sides of the street. Traffic stopped. People climbed onto curbs and benches to get a better look. Some wept. Some smiled. Many just stood still, rooted in disbelief that something had actually broken through. She hadn't stayed to take a bow, to accept praise, or to let her name ring in the streets. Instead, she walked quietly from the precinct's rear exit, badge in her pocket, her steps carrying her across 4 blocks of cracked sidewalk to the edge of town, where an old brick chapel stood half forgotten between a shuttered diner and an overgrown gas station. The church doors were open. The sanctuary was empty, save for one figure seated in the front pew. Simone stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked beneath her boots. The light filtered through the stained glass in slivers of red and gold, casting fractured halos across the dusty air. The figures turned. It was a Sunday, and for the first time in years the pews of St. Elijah's were full. The old church, long overlooked on the edge of Westridge, had become a gathering place, not of grief, but of reckoning. Beneath its worn beams, hundreds stood shoulder to shoulder. Survivors, students, neighbors, families. They didn't come to watch the news. They came to witness a legacy. Simone stood at the altar in full uniform, not to command attention, but to honor it. Her presence was a statement, her silence a warning. At the center of the sanctuary, a portrait of Letitia Brooks radiated purpose. Around it, worn sneakers, protest signs, and a folded hoodie with her slogan, "See Us Clearly." Simone stepped forward. The room fell still. She didn't just speak truth, Simone said, her voice clear but edged with pain. She carried it until the very end. And when the system couldn't silence her, it tried to erase her. She paused. The silence cracked under a single sob. "1 week ago," she continued, "we found Letitia's body in an abandoned warehouse in Crestwood County. She had been beaten, burned, chained to a rusted chair." Gasps. A man covered his face. A girl in the front whispered, "Why her?" "They couldn't break her," Simone said, "because she knew what was coming, and she left something behind." From her coat, Simone pulled a flash drive. She stepped toward a monitor beside the altar. The screen blinked to life, and Letitia's face appeared. Her cheek bruised, her collar bloodied. Letitia looked tired, but unbroken. "If you're watching this," she said, "I didn't make it." The church didn't move. "I'm not afraid," she went on. "Never was. I'm angry. Angry that silence still wins, that fear still works. But if I'm gone, don't make me a hashtag. Make me a movement. Say my name. Not just in pain, but in protest, in policy, in every courtroom where justice stutters." She looked straight into the camera. "Say it like you mean it." Then the screen went black. A beat, then a sound. Soft at first, then swelling. "Letitia! Letitia! Letitia!" Gwen Harlow stood near the back, no longer a reporter shaping the story, but a witness facing one. Her eyes brimmed with tears, for what she once ignored and what she could no longer deny. Terrence stepped beside Simone, holding a sealed box, data, proof, files that screamed. Surveillance videos, wire transfers, emails, everything. Simone turned to the live cameras. "This box is going to the Department of Justice," she said. "I'm calling for an expansion of the federal investigation, not just into Westridge, but across the entire state. Every precinct with missing footage, every name the system buried." She set the box down on the altar. Behind her, the choir began to hum, not a hymn, but a chant. Low, rhythmic, a heartbeat of resistance. Outside, a crowd had filled the plaza in front of City Hall. Projected onto the building was a single, bold image: the Letitia Brooks Act, whistleblower protection for victims of police misconduct status, pending, United States Congress. The crowd erupted. Voices lifted, flags rose, because what they tried to bury had become a bill. They tried to kill a witness. Instead, they sparked a revolution. And Letitia's name was no longer just being said, it was being written. into law. And somewhere inside the Capitol, nervous hands flipped through talking points, because the streets had spoken, and this time they weren't asking. Letitia Brooks didn't die in vain. Her voice, silenced in a warehouse, now echoes in courtrooms, classrooms, and every home where justice is long overdue. What they tried to bury became a beacon, and what they dismissed as just another protester became the face of a national reckoning. Because this story was never just about one woman, it was about a system that thought it could erase her, and a community that refused to forget. Simone didn't step forward as a hero. She stood as a reminder that truth is dangerous when spoken by the unheard, but even more unstoppable when amplified by the many. From one hidden file to a federal act, from a jail cell to Capitol Hill, Letitia's legacy proved one thing: accountability doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door down. So here's our question to you. Where were you when her name became law? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from, because your voice is part of the movement. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, not just for Letitia, but for every voice still fighting to be heard. Together, we carry her fire forward, and we make sure they never silence another truth again.